Good Friday to everybody. Gov 603. Welcome again to week boom 6 and the review of your answers from week 5. Let's make sure we get things in proper order here. Much better. Okay, I am here at last. I so apologize to you for being late with this second video. Normally these things like Wednesday, Thursday. But this week on Wednesday, my son was run over, and I mean like while on his bicycle on his way home from school. And so in addition to handling the call when I came in, because he sort of picked himself up the pavement and called me and said, "Hey, Dad, I just got run over." It's like, oh, okay, that's a weird way to start a call. Then there was dealing with the issue at the scene, and now because the driver left after she ran him over, like, yeah, duh. Dealing with the police and the paperwork and the felony hit and run, and then getting the bicycle fixed. And my son is a little bumped and bruised, but thankfully he is okay. So anyway, I'm really sorry. It's just been like one of those nuts, things, crazy weeks. Okay. And I've still got this little sore throat here. So I'm going to, be like popping a throat lozenge and stuff like that. All right. So, your papers, if you haven't turned those in, and you heard this from me when I did the first video for this week. Got to have them, folks. Okay. I'll be grading them this week, and I should have them done by Wednesday, Thursday. The idea is to turn them around quickly to give you an idea as to how you're doing by way of writing and researching. And then that helps guide you in part number 2. All right. But in the meantime, what you might be saying, what exactly ought I to be doing? Well, you ought to be preparing for your midterm exam. Okay. And that's coming up on the, what is it? We're going to open it up on the 27th. So that's less than 2 weeks from today. Okay. And then it'll close on the 28th. There's a review sheet for the midterm exam in module number 6. Just as for this week, you can take a look at it. But you've heard me say this before in the videos. The way to review for this exam: go back, go through the discussion boards, make sure, number 1, you can define all the terms, but number 2, you can articulate, you understand the concept involved with the terms. Okay. And this is a closed book exam, no notes, no books, no internet, no referring to class, on your honor. All right. And let's take a look at the questions. I'll see if I can not choke on this throat lozenge while we do it. This last week, week 5, we again focused in on some definitions. They're important for you to know. Number 1, what is external validity? This is actually very key to understanding what this is and how it works, because this is really, except for, personal recreational research and pilot studies, external validity is the entire point of doing research. Okay. Joshua, you went first. Let's take you first. Howard defines external validity as our ability to extend the findings to some larger population of cases. As many research cases deal with control groups to determine norms within larger groups, the external validity, as I understand it, is what allows researchers to make broader claims about their research question, or rather, their research findings. Okay, so yes, Joshua, right idea. We're just going to tweak the verbiage, which is very important. Okay. Here's the thing. Here's why I don't think this gets, the sort of attention that it needs, because we like to envision ourselves as these tremendously separate and individualistic beings, and we're really not. Our behavior is predictable. So let's say we have a certain behavior. Doesn't matter what it is. All right. Let's say it's smoking and how much you smoke during a given period of time. If you gather data, if you ask people, well, how many cigarettes do you smoke every week? How many number of cigarettes do you smoke every week? And you plotted them on a graph. So the time frame, the week would be here, and the number of cigarettes smoked would be here. All right. You'd get this curve that shows the highest number of cigarettes smoked here occurred at a certain time. Okay. And the lower number of cigarettes smoked occurred within a certain time, and the lower number of cigarettes smoked occurred over a certain period of time. Okay. What you'd find is actually the average, that hump, that's where most people would fall into. Our behavior, even when we're doing things that we think are highly individualistic, is predictable, right? So when you set up a study, like the proposed study that you're setting up for your papers, you can take a statistically significant number of people from the larger group. Now, what does that mean? Generally, it's at least 10%. So if you have 100 people, you need to study 10. If you have 1,000, you need to study 100. If you have 300, or excuse me, if you have 3,000, you need to study 300, and so on and so forth. Okay. If you study the behavior of those 10% of people, you can, with a certain percentage of accuracy, predict the behavior of everybody else. Now, empirical research, and in this case, we're talking about quantitative research, deals in probabilities, not in absolutes. It's kind of like the weather. When you read a weather report, I mean, it might say it's absolutely going to rain. It's snowing, by the way, where I'm at today. Who would have thunk it? So you usually don't see it's absolutely going to be this weather today. You get like 20% chance of showers, partly cloudy, which means it's also partly sunny. You get a description of what's going to go on in a statistical percentage. That's the case with human behavior. So what you're after as a researcher is data that is that comes from a well-designed study with sufficient number of participants that, and here's the important part, you can apply your findings to everybody else. The applying of your findings to everybody else, that's called external validity. Okay. So although Joshua, we'll go back to your question, which allows the researchers to make broader claims about their research questions, not so much their questions, but about the answers to their questions. And then you have one example I can think of as finding that many people who suffer from diabetes are obese, and then being able to infer that diabetes and obesity are related. Probably a crude example. Well, no, I mean, if you mean crude by like unkind, no. I mean, there are two general categories of diabetes because it comes from two different ways. Type 1 is just a dysfunction of the pancreatic organ, which secretes insulin. And actually, it's little bits on the pancreas that secrete insulin. The Isle of Langerhans. I don't know who named it. Probably some guy named Langerhans. So for some people, they're born that the pancreas doesn't secrete sufficient insulin, and this insulin is the hormone that tells the body how to take sugar out of the bloodstream, and that causes problems. And then there's type 1, that's called type 1 diabetes. And then there's type 2, in which the cells of the body stop responding to the insulin that the body makes. Okay. And why is there a relationship between that and obesity? Well, when you intake when somebody intakes high quantities of sugars, and sugar can be sugar like, out of a sugar bowl, or carbohydrates, the key ingredient in a carbohydrate, once it's digested, is a sugar, as far as your body is concerned. Okay, it's called glucose, and its chemical compound is C6H12O6, 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, 6 oxygen. And it's put together in a chain, and your body reads it as sugar, glucose. I mean, you know, just it is what it is. Metabolically speaking, if you have a bowl, if you like cereal, and you have a bowl of a highly processed carbohydrate sugared cereal, Cocoa Puffs, okay, because that's corn that's been highly processed and then coated with sugar. Metabolically, that is how it's digested. Your body can't tell the difference between that and just a bowl of sugar. You should, in terms of how your body's going to react, it's just like spooning in straight sugar. Okay, when sugar gets into the system, the body releases insulin. If the system is constantly being doused with sugar, so maybe if someone has a highly carbohydrate processed breakfast with sugar, so like donuts, then they have a lot of processed carbohydrates for lunch. So they go to Taco Bell and they have chips and they have like a tortilla, which is processed carbohydrates. And then they have in between there, they have like sodas, which is just straight sugar. Okay. And then for dinner, they have, they go to Chipotle and they have a big burrito and chips, more carbohydrates. The body releases insulin every time those highly processed sugars come into the system. It's got to get it out of the blood. Well, it's just like if you rub your hand with your finger like that, eventually those cells, those nerve endings, are going to go numb. This happens in the body, that eventually the cells stop responding to insulin, that hormone that tells them, oh, take the sugar out of the blood and absorb it. They stop responding to that. And then the blood, or the sugar, remains in the blood, and this is diabetes. That's type 2. So and people that are taking in a lot of processed carbohydrates, once the body stops responding to the insulin and taking out, the liver kicks in and turns the sugar and those processed carbohydrates into fat and then stores it. It's very interesting. I know we're on a tangent here. This is really interesting by way of empirical research. The body is a remarkable system, except for it has a couple of really key flaws. Number one, it assumes that anything that you're doing externally, there must be a reason for it. And number two, it doesn't have an off switch. So if you're taking in a lot of calories, and even if you don't have a lot of calories, but a significant portion of those are highly processed carbohydrates and sugars, your body assumes that you must be taking in those calories, or that high level of calories, for a reason. And it's going to store them. It assumes there must be some catastrophe coming. There must be some famine. You're stocking up for some reason, and it stores them. And here's the other deficit that our bodies have. It doesn't have an off switch. It doesn't have like, okay, we've stored enough. Now storing any more is actually a problem for us. Storing more of these processed carbohydrates and sugars as fats is going to cause excess strain on our joints. It's going to deposit fat around our organs and make them difficult to work. It's going to, constantly secreting insulin is going to make the cells stop responding to it, and we end up with diabetes. It doesn't have those off switches in a number of cases. I mean, there are the cases in which it does. That's one where it doesn't, because it assumes if we're putting the calories in, there must be some reason. And then finally, number three, the body's a remarkable system, but one of the things that's problematic is once it reaches a level of, a certain level, say a certain weight, it assumes that you put that weight there for a reason, and it resists burning it. So if you ever try to lose weight, and I have, I still am careful of my weight because I work out a lot and I hike a lot. And I'm probably, I'm 10 to 15 pounds heavier than I want to be. So I'm working to get rid of that. and it seems like a struggle. Well, it is, because your body doesn't want to let it go. It assumes, there must be something coming that you need this for. So, or why did we put it here in the first place? Okay. So Joshua, not a crude example. Doing empirical research that helps us understand what the relationship is of one thing to another, and you're doing it with a control group, and then saying, okay, now can we apply this to the larger population? That's external validity. That's extremely important. So you finish your answer. It makes a good characteristic in research design because it ensures that the findings of the study can be generalized beyond the scope of the samples used in the research. Okay, now, for you as growing empirical researchers, one of the things you should first do, and we get this in politics a lot, blankety blank number of Americans surveyed hate Trump, love Trump, think Biden's too old and senile, think he's doing a great job, whatever. When you see those percentages thrown up, 60% of Americans think, Trump is the next best thing to sliced bread, or 60% of Americans think he's a mean orange man, or wherever the divide is, okay? The first thing you want to do is take a look at the sample size. Because if the sample size is quite small, then you can't make these characterizations about the people external to the research. So if let's say you had a room with 100 people in it, and you asked one what their political opinion was, well, you can't assume what the other 99 are thinking based on the one. All right. So when you see research and you see numbers, the first thing, because that is their statement of external validity, the first thing you should want to see is the sample size, and then see who's in the sample. Because if it's like, 60% of Americans surveyed think Trump's a big scary orange man, and then you look at the sample and it's 80% made up of 80% people who identify as Democrats. Well, okay, then it's probably going to tilt that way. Okay. So external validity is the statement that what you've done in your work can be applied to the populace as a whole. Working it the other way, when you come across research that says it's applied to the populace as a whole, start looking backwards at what they did to see if their claim of external validity is valid. Okay, question number 2. Briefly explain the difference between large N and small n, and I mean like uppercase, lowercase. Okay, case studies. That's what I mean by that. Sorry if that was confusing. Susan, large N case studies focus on drawing conclusions based on large sample size with the goal of obtaining generalized information, while small N case studies focus on the smaller sample size in order to get more specific, detailed research information. Okay, good. And it's sometimes represented as capital N and then lowercase n when you see it in empirical research. Okay, so really you can do research with just a few participants. But here's the thing: as an empirical researcher, just be honest. Just say, we only asked 10 people, and so we can't generalize to a population of 1 million. Small sample size studies are good for what are called pilot studies. You're just kind of wondering, is there really a there? Is there anything really going on? You can do a pilot study to cue you in as to what might be going on. And you can also do a pilot study to sort of test out a questionnaire or a methodology, or see if people understand what it is you're trying to get at. But you can't, and you should be very careful. Well, again, when you see studies, take a small sample size and say, well, this is true for everybody. Okay, no can do. Question number 3, briefly discuss the 2 various hypotheses listed in chapter 4. Using 2 hypotheses selected as a model, construct 2 more. Okay, now you heard me, I'm on hypotheses like constantly. The reason for that is, as a researcher, if you construct a good solid hypothesis, this will help you so much in carrying out your research, or even designing what it might be. Because a well-constructed hypothesis will tell you what you have to do for a literature review. It'll tell you what you have to have as a methodology. It'll tell you, a lot of research is what not to look at, because you don't have all the time in the world. It'll tell you what you should and shouldn't be looking at. Okay. Ellen, let's take a look at you. Numero uno, a directional hypothesis predicts the effect of nature from one independent variable on a dependent variable, or prediction made based on specific events, experimental, of an experimental variable. Okay. So, and this is the one, this is the main type of hypothesis you've been hearing a lot about from me, saying it has to have at least two variables. You have to make a prediction about a causal relationship, and then it has to have a direction. Okay, so Ellen, here's your sample. Participating in phishing training, PH training, that's the independent variable, reduces the chance of getting hacked. Dependent variable. Okay, good. Okay. Then we have the hypothesis of no relationship, is also known as the null hypothesis. This is important. Okay. Which does not involve the data. Instead, is a statement about the parameters. It also implies that the coefficient on the variable's interest is not significant. That is, the observed relationship could have occurred by chance. In other words, that let's start with the hypothesis that you gave above here, Ellen. Let's say that you said participating in phishing training reduced the chance of getting hacked. And if you did that research, and just as many people got hacked that participated in phishing training as didn't who participated in phishing training, there is no relationship. So you would say the null hypothesis is supported, but let's look at which one. Determining the correlation between petal height and petal width of a sunflower. There's no relationship between petal height and petal width. Okay. Yeah, you need another variable here. Okay, so null hypothesis will have two variables, but null hypothesis is what happens to a hypothesis if you determine the relationship is corollary, the one thing is going on at the other, but it's not causal, the one thing is causing the other. So you still have to have two things. Okay, so you've left something out there. Do adults use computers to access the internet more than teens? Okay. Okay, now you have two. That's fine. Okay, good. Does everybody understand null hypothesis? If you don't, email me. Okay, question 4. Briefly discuss the difference between qualitative and quantitative research methodologies. These are almost self-explanatory. Okay, Camillus, let's go to you. In the realm of research, there are two widely recognized approaches known as quantitative and qualitative research methodologies. True. Qualitative research aims to comprehend experiences, meaning, and social phenomenon. Well, that could be true of quantitative, but it's how you go about it. This type of research involves conducting in-depth interviews, making observations, analyzing texts and documents. Okay. For instance, consider a study that aims to explore the experience of individuals who have undergone bariatric surgery and understands their perspective on physical, emotional, and social changes that follow this procedure. Okay. On the other hand, quantitative research focuses on collecting data and analyzing it statistically to identify patterns and relationships. Okay, good. So remember, by way of two broad general categories, qualitative, you're dealing with texts, oral input, so they can be historical documents. Okay. Quantitative, you're dealing with numbers. All right. So that's, the best way to sort of keep those two separate in your head. Okay. We're running a little longer than we mean to, but only about 20 something minutes. So, all right, everybody, have a great weekend. All right. I think about you. I pray about you, especially those of you who've reached out to me and let me know, you're going through some tough times, and I'm praying for you, especially. Okay. Make sure to because we're less than 2 weeks out from the exam, so get back in there and read those discussion sections. Make sure you understand all the stuff and you could apply it, okay, in a way that you could discuss it, and then you're going to do great. I will work on your papers, get them back to you next week. Everybody, God bless you, and I will see you on Canvas. Bye-bye.